Welcome to Bull City Coordinators. This is Ben, and I am very excited today to be doing our first interview in the website's history. I have a special guest for us who is involved with the Duke program, and I'm going to ask him to go ahead and introduce himself now. Would you go ahead and introduce yourself, please, sir?
Hi, I'm Charlie Gelman. I was a student coach for the last 3 years at Duke, and I'm also the advanced statistics analyst at Duke Wrestling.
Are you still enrolled in school, Charlie?
No, I just graduated this past fall.
Well, congratulations. What'd you get your degree or degrees in?
I was majoring in statistics and minoring in computer science.
And I understand you're kind of the expert for Duke athletics and analytics. Is that more or less correct?
I would say just in the two sports, football and basketball. I think baseball has a guy and basketball has a guy, but I'll take the claim in those two sports.
All right. Well, I think a lot of us have heard about sabermetrics. We've probably seen Moneyball and done kind of some initial reading about how it has impacted various different sports. But could you just explain it to kind of the casual fans and even the dedicated fans? What is the field of analytics and how does it apply to athletics?
Honestly, the entire idea of analytics is trying to gain information about your opponents and about yourselves to try to better your team, which sounds like something that is already done, and that's because it is. Every coach is supposed to be trying to gain as much information about their own team and their opponents as possible, and analytics is just a great way to look beyond the surface and try to find newer insights using numbers and just overall data.
So, if you could tell us a little bit about your role with the football program, given that we do football coverage at Bull City Coordinators, I'm going to focus on that primarily. I listened to some of your interviews and read a little bit about what you do with the wrestling program, but tell us, what's your role been with the football program and how do you use analytics and these advanced statistics to help the football team?
Yeah, so I work on the defensive side of the ball. I have been working especially with cornerbacks and safeties, trying to coach them up, but mostly doing analytics. I would say I kind of just assist Coach Guerreri, Coach Albert, and Coach McGrath. Those three are very cerebral guys. Same with Coach Benedict. All are very cerebral guys that are really into analytics. And then I've also I just kind of make studies about opponents, ourselves, what do I think will help us win games, and what will help us just improve our team in general.
And so, as you're doing that on the defensive end of things, and you're working with the cornerbacks, working with the secondary, what is it that you're looking for? How are you trying to gain an edge for the team, to the extent you can talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, just to speak in vague terms, I really like looking at opponents' tendencies. There's usually ways to figure out things that opponents do just based on different situations, different alignments, different personnels. Everyone has some sort of tendency because in the heat of a moment, you aren't necessarily looking at every different tendency breaker when you're play calling or when you're substituting. And so those are the kind of things that we look for in terms of scouting opponents, along with just how good are our opponents. Like, is there certain weaknesses that each person has? Does a quarterback struggle versus a certain defense? Those are the kind of things that I'm looking at.
Now, how did you end up, because I know you have a wrestling background, how did you end up with the football program?
So I actually always wanted to work in football, but I know I've always wrestled. I wrestled in high school. I ended up getting 4 concussions, so I had to stop wrestling. And then my senior year, I was kind of just helping doing a wrestling program, which I now use at Duke to help with statistics there. And basically, after my first season at wrestling, they were like, yeah, I mean, if you want to work in football as well, we'll get you hooked up with football, and so they reached out to the football team, and then that's how I started out there.
So what made you want to get into football? Why was that your priority?
So I really liked football. You mentioned Moneyball earlier. That was a movie that kind of got me into analytics originally. I started thinking during that when I was watching that movie, hey, no one really is doing this for football. I could be kind of the guy. Obviously, recently more people have started doing it. A lot more people must have had the same thought. But yeah, so I started becoming like a 14-year-old degenerate gambler on football, and then recently have transitioned more into, hey, actually instead of wasting my life away gambling, let me go help a team win.
Well, are you trying to get Brad Pitt to play you in a movie about your life when that comes to fruition, or do you have someone else in mind for that?
I mean, based on the precedent from Moneyball, it looks like I'll have more of a Jonah Hill kind of character playing me. So that's cool.
Well, I always tell people in the legal world in which I live, you want to go big or go home. So you got to shoot, you got to aim high, or sometimes we joke around, aim low and overachieve. So maybe not Jonah Hill, maybe not Brad Pitt, somewhere in between. Might work.
Might end up with like a Michael Cera kind of character.
Well, I hope you're an Arrested Development fan, because I think that's my favorite role of his.
I've never actually seen that show, but I think that I found a new show to watch over quarantine.
Oh yeah, no. It's a great show, and I'm glad I can help you out. And so, to stick with that though, I'm actually kind of curious. What do you read? What do you watch? How do you occupy your downtime? I mean, I'm just curious. Are there podcasts that you listen to? And we'll get a little bit more into how you try to keep an edge on the analytics side of things, but on the personal side of things, what sort of things interest you?
Honestly, like, I don't really know what I do with my time now, because obviously I was just doing schoolwork whenever I had free time these last three and a half years. But I was actually just joking with my friends the other day, because I just got back home from football, and now I started to realize, wow, I don't really have any like hobbies other than football. So I think really I just keep working on football, or just watching football, or working on wrestling, watching wrestling. Those are just kind of the two things I do with all my time, other than other than just doing schoolwork. So I guess in terms of like what podcast I like to listen to, what wrestling, what I like to read, I just really like to figure out any sort of articles, podcasts, or anything just about football or wrestling. Those are just the two things I occupy my time with.
And are there any sort of data analytic sources, kind of big numbers? Are you like a tech guy listening to maybe Kara Swisher's podcast and other things that you look into to keep an edge in your field?
I think the biggest thing is honestly just going on Twitter for me. Just people have a lot of good tweets out there about football and about analytics in general. So those are kind of things that I like to read up on. And then if there's something that interests me, I'll like Google it. Usually there's like a podcast or a video on it, which is great. Those are kind of the things I like to read just to see if I'm falling behind on something. Other than that, there's some good blogs out there just about football in general that I like to read up on. Usually what will happen is I'll try to read up on sort of traditional football blogs about play calls or play design, and then that'll spark my mind on something with analytics.
Okay, you mentioned Twitter. I was going to save this till the end of the interview, but since you mentioned Twitter, as a lawyer, you've got to know when to segue and to stay on topics. I want to read something to you and then ask you about it, okay? On December 11th at 4:49 p.m., you tweeted the following. Just touched down in Tallahassee. The T in T-Pain is for Tallahassee, meaning his name is actually Tallahassee Payne. And that's what we plan to deliver tomorrow. Do you have any regrets about that tweet?
to be fair, we did plan to deliver that the next day, and so no, I don't regret that at all.
I'm just giving you a hard time. I tell you, I made a lot of predictions in my life, and certainly about this football season that didn't pan out the way that I had hoped. My wife actually does some data analysis for her job, and she had a couple of questions she wanted to ask me to ask you about it, because one of the things she really struggles with is feeling like she's gotten good data to work with and also getting people to understand the information that she's conveying. Of those two things, are they equally difficult? Is one more difficult than the other? What do you find to be the most difficult part of the data analysis and communication part of your jobs?
I think the hardest thing is trying to figure out a way of communicating results. This is just something that seems to be a thing in analytics in general, is that there's difficulty in trying to explain what a model's results are in a way that makes sense, because I can be like, oh yeah, the p-value was less than 0.05, and someone who with no statistics background would be like, all right, cool.
Yeah,
like,
P is a letter, right? I got it. Yeah.
So I think that's definitely the most difficult part in trying to communicating anything, is just trying to figure out how to actually explain things in a way that makes sense and is just a practical thing to teach. Because I think that another thing is trying to explain uncertainty. Because obviously every good model should have some sort of margin of error. And I think trying to explain point estimates versus interval estimates is just another difficult thing to explain, just a difficult concept to explain clearly. I think those would be my two things I would say is difficult.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that about the uncertainty, and I don't want to get into a political discussion, but the modeling and the polling and like the analysis at 538, for example, for this election cycle, things didn't maybe turn out the way that they had expected, but it was all within the data set range that they had put together. Right. And so, I mean, do you try to explain it? I know Nate Silver used an example where he said, look, if your candidate has a 30% chance of winning, that may not look particularly good, but if you hit 300 in baseball, you're an all-star.
Right. I mean, that's a decent way of explaining it. I think it's more just like, hey, if there's a 30% chance of something happening, then it shouldn't be out of the question that it happens. So like if I'm flipping a coin, right, and let's say it's a weighted coin, so it's 30% heads, 70% tails, you don't flip it once and be like, oh, it showed up heads, clearly those percentages are messed up. No, I mean, you gotta flip it 100 times to see whether or not it actually is 30 times out of 100 is going to be heads. And so then that's the difficulty with election prediction is, right, you can only try it once. You can only do one election. And so people see that one election result and say, hey, this should be the actual mean, instead of you came up with, I think the estimate was like 328, the final result was 306, and they're like, wow, you clearly skewed it towards Biden. But it's like, it's not necessarily true, because this was in his margin of error, and this was a possible outcome that he mentioned, but not the average outcome. So yeah, the results ended up being more Republican skewed, but was still in his estimate, so it doesn't necessarily show the model was wrong.
Right. Yeah, and I think maybe part of what a lot of folks, certainly myself included, because I don't have the math or science background, in trying to understand how you apply, for example, analytics to and advanced statistics to sports, don't understand enough about margin of error. Do you have to explain that to your coaches? Do they get it? Do they understand, like, hey, this isn't perfection. It's not a crystal ball, but it's giving you the best data we can give you.
Yeah, I think just on the defensive side of the ball, they've pretty much they've heard me rant enough about it, but they definitely all get it that I don't necessarily have to do it anymore. The better way we kind of explain it is in terms of like confidence, basically. So here's your point estimate, and then if it differs from a different estimate, but the different estimate is in the margin of error, then it's like, okay, we're not that confident that this new estimate is better. But if it falls out of the margin of error, then you're like, okay, we're pretty confident about this. So that's like kind of a better way of visualizing it without going into too many details. But yeah, they all, on the defensive side of the ball, who I spend my entire days with, they all pretty much understand margin of errors at this point because they probably all heard me rant too much about it.
Tired of hearing you talk about it.
I mean, they'll ask me a question and I'll just rant for hours. They're like, we only needed a one sentence answer, but that's cool.
I got you. So tell me a little bit, where do you, to the extent you can answer this, where do you look for your data? Where does the data come from that you use to analyze and help put a game plan together?
I'll just tell you the two data sources. The two data sources I mostly use are CFB Scraper, which is also known as collegefootballdata.com. They kind of have I don't know how to describe it. They have a R package, which is nice for me. But yeah, they have a website called collegefootballdata.com. And then the other site I use is profootballfocus.com. We obviously have a subscription to that. You've probably seen them post their grades about, forcing completion percentage in band coverage. Here's the highest graded players, right? You've probably seen those on Twitter. They have a ton of data on Pro Football Focus, especially their play-by-play data. And yeah, that's mostly what I end up using, mostly Pro Football Focus.
Do you combine that with film room analysis, or do you leave that part of it to someone else?
No, so yeah, that was one of the bigger projects I had, was creating a cut-up generator, which is basically based on Pro Football Focus plays. We've written code to generate cut-ups based on different Pro Football Focus play IDs, which, not to get too nerdy with it, but it allows me to manipulate some data, filter some data frames, and then generate some cut-ups, and that way me or coaches or whoever, we can watch those cut-ups and confirm whether or not that data was right.
Okay, and so are you going to be back with the football program going forward? I know you interned a little bit with the Ravens. I'd like to hear some about that in a second, but what are your plans for the next football season?
I think there's a bit of uncertainty of what I'm going to be doing, just because obviously being a student assistant requires you to be a student, and so I'm no longer a student. But I would obviously be open to coming back as a GA or whatever role they would ask me to be, just because working for Coach Cutcliffe is just amazing. Working for Coach Carreri, Coach Albert, working with everyone on that staff is just awesome. So I would definitely be open, but obviously I'm going to keep my ears open to any other opportunity, and we'll just see what happens. I mean, I definitely want to stay in football, and I'm not going to rule out Duke because Duke has given me so much, so it would just be unfair to not.
Well, what did you learn from your time with the Ravens? I know from listening to your other podcast interview, there's only so much you can talk about with that. Being an attorney, I totally get that. But tell us what you can that was most educational or informative or life-altering, changing from your time with the Ravens.
I think the best part about being with the Ravens is that they're one of the more analytics-focused franchises in the NFL. You probably saw that coming season of how much they would go for on fourth down. They obviously ended up having a great season with Lamar just winning MVP, but they're a really well-run organization. You can tell from the moment you walk in there. They have Eric DeCosta is their GM, but Ozzie Newsome, their old GM, was always around. It was just a really well-run operation, and they have very smart guys smart guys and girls just working in their front office. It was just awesome to learn from all of them, especially learning from their analytics people. Just, it was awesome. Yeah.
Well, they have to be really intelligent because they made sure to get Matt Skura on the roster. I think
Oh yeah.
he may well be Duke's best center, but certainly that I can remember. And I know the center position was rough this year because of all the injuries the team went through. But I mean, I thought the line managed pretty well given everything that happened to him at Duke this year.
No doubt.
You mentioned working with Coach Cutcliffe is great, and look, I've been critical like a lot of frustrated fans get, but I really respect everything he's done at Duke. I think he's just tremendous. I mean, he made the program relevant, and it wasn't just me excited when there would be one win in a season anymore, and he raised the expectations. I just be curious to hear what has it been like working for him? What is maybe something that's great about Coach Cutcliffe that we don't know?
hmm I think, well, first, I think to address the frustration, I think the best part about what Coach Cutcliffe has done is made us be in a position where we can be frustrated. I think that was something that was definitely, that might have been lacking before Coach Cutcliffe arrived, but he's obviously moved Duke football to a whole nother level. And I will not be surprised if we don't keep seeing us move up in that regards. I mean, Coach Cutcliffe brings just a wealth of experience, and just he's an overall great person and mentor. I don't think I could speak enough of just about him being a great person makes working for him so much better. Like, he understands people's livelihoods. He understands kind of what's important in people's lives. Just he understands what needs to be said in situations where something has to be said, or where someone is maybe not even looking for something to be said, but then they hear him say it to them and they're like, wow, that was what I really needed. I think he's just a great person to work with, a great person to work for, a great person to learn from. And I think people would be surprised that he's very analytics minded himself. I think people would think that more that's the younger coaches' jobs, but he is always looking for an edge, and I think that's something that I really respect in him.
Well, that's very interesting to hear about his interest in analytics because it's a field I don't really understand very well. But what I can say in the legal field is you see people who don't adapt, people who don't make changes, and they start to get left behind. And if you are adapting and you are making changes, that's a really positive development to see, and I think it's a good thing. And that's great to hear. I mean, I know I should be asking you questions, but I will just say this now. I mean, everything he's done for the program to make it relevant is amazing. And however long he remains at Duke, whenever he decides he's tired of coaching, whenever that may be, I think he definitely has warranted a statute or some sort of recommendations, a statute out there. Go back to legal field. I said statute. Sorry. But he deserves to be commemorated at the program for the reasons that you said. I mean, he made the school relevant in football, and I don't think we can lose sight of that. And it's easy to do that in the heat of a difficult season. I'm curious to the extent that you can address it. You guys are coaching. The games aren't breaking the way that you want. How do you stay focused to keep putting the game plan together, and how do you keep the team focused?
Well, one thing Coach always likes to say is, when you're going through hell, keep going, otherwise that becomes your destination. And so that's basically our mentality is, if things are not going our way, we can't just sit there and pout. Otherwise, we're just going to have nothing but bad results. So we just got to keep working, keep grinding until that no longer becomes our destination. It just becomes something we're going through.
Right. It comes back to that saying that I've heard a bunch of times about making your own luck. And Devon Edwards, I think, was the best example of a guy who could always create his own luck. I mean, the plays he had against NC State, those touchdowns that he had, just, I mean, he was a heck of a player. I think that was probably a little bit before your time there. But you know, and you've got guys like Durant who could always break off a long touchdown whenever it called for it. And of course, Deshaun Jackson breaking the U, one of my favorite moments in Duke football history when he ripped off that run. He'll be missed, as will a lot of the other seniors. So let me just ask a little bit about this. You told me you were from Chicago originally. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. Turning to baseball. North side, south side, Cubs, White Sox. What is it?
Oh, it's South Side, and it's not even close. That was the best 2005, greatest time of my life, even though I was only 6 years old. But I'll never forget when the Cubs won the World Series. Everyone in my school who was a Cubs fan, went to downtown to the parade. And the rest of us, there was, no teachers there because they were also downtown. It was just a bunch of us kids, all of us White Sox fans, just there in our White Sox gear, yeah, that'll be us soon. Hopefully that will be us soon, but I don't know.
I'll give you half credit because you did mention the Cubs, which was the correct answer. So, I grew up watching WGN as a kid, so I remember Ryan Sandberg, Mark Grace, Andre Dawson. That's what I grew up watching. All they're seared into my memory. And as a Duke football fan and a Cubs fan, the '90s were not kind to me. I'll just put it that way. So, is there anything else that you think that we should know about using analytics, using this advanced data in football that would help us understand it as fans?
Trying to think the best thing that would help people understand it as fans. I think the biggest thing is that there's a lot of good resources out there for learning about just analytics. I think a great couple follows on Twitter would be Stats O War. That's just Stats of War, but with no F. And then just CFB Scrape Bar in general. Both of them would be great follows just to learn a little bit about analytics, give you some insights. I think one thing that everyone keeps talking about are win probability and expected points added. Just to give you a little bit of a definition of each of those, win probability is based on the current situation, which is score, down, distance, time in the game, and then a little bit extra factors depending on people's models. It's the probability that team has is winning. A lot of people have seen that graph on ESPN. And then the other one would be expected points added. That is just based on field position, down, distance, and time in game. A team is expected to score this amount of points. So, if I'm at my own 1 yard line, the most expected points would be negative because it's expected that the next points will come from an opponent's score. Well, if I'm at the opposing one, the expected points would be around 6 or so, because it'd be expected that I'd be scoring a touchdown in the next score, whether I score on that drive or if I turn the ball over, they punt it, and then I have another drive to go try to score a touchdown. So then expected points added is based on a given play, how many added expected points that I just have based on that. So those would be the two statistics that I think people it would be wise to learn, just because it helps you understand the hidden game behind football.
Okay, that's really helpful. And Charlie, I just want to say I appreciate you taking the time to do this. It was great talking to you. I feel like I learned a lot. It's helped me get a better handle on how this stuff works. And if you wouldn't mind, please give our best as the Duke fan base to the entire coaching staff, especially the head man. I know this was a rough year for him. And give our best to the players. There's a lot of guys who aren't coming back. Unfortunately, we're going to miss seeing them in Duke Blue and seeing them in Durham. Please pass along nothing but our best wishes for a great season to the entire program next year. And if Anybody else would like to do an interview that you know of, I'm more than happy to set it up at any time. I always love getting a chance to talk about Duke football with people.
Will do. Well, I appreciate you guys having me.
Well, thanks a lot for coming on. We appreciate your time. And Charlie, we wish you the absolute best of luck going forward.
All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate you guys.